where we are searching for solutions to global challenges.
We have to rethink the wild beast that is capitalism.
All you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
The point is not about growth. The fact is that how we redistribute that growth.
There are still too many people who are left out of that recovery and acceleration of growth.
It's about power that's concentrated in the hands of the wealthy and well-connected. Power that is used to benefit the rich and kick dirt in the face of everyone else.
It's been almost 250 years since The Wealth of Nations was published. Free markets and capitalism would lift the poor and increase prosperity for all. But today, is economic growth advancing opportunities for everyone, or is it creating more social and economic injustice and destroying our planet? Was Karl Marx right when he predicted that the capitalist system will eventually collapse and destroy itself? That is our debate here in Doha.
Please welcome your Doha Debates moderator, Ghida Fakhri.
Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to the fifth in our series of new Doha Debates. Today, as we just said, we'll be taking on the challenge of capitalism as a sustainable economic model. Can humanity prosper without growth, or must we pursue growth and suffer the consequences, the side effects, in the interest of improving the lives of millions, even billions of people around the world? Some say a free market economy means the poor become less poor. Others believe that growth is actually widening inequalities and destroying our environment. A third camp argues that transformation of that system is possible. More regulations, greater inclusivity, and a less hypocritical version of capitalism is in order. Well, today we'll be hearing from three experts, each with a very different idea for a solution and a distinct approach to a subject that is hotly contested in protests and civil unrest across the world. Then we'll be heading into our majlis, where we'll try to build some consensus, if we can, across our differences. We are live from Northwestern University here in Doha, Qatar, and we're also live streaming on Facebook, Now This, YouTube, and Twitter. We, of course, want you to join the conversation as well. So let's go straight to our correspondent, Neloufar. Tell us everything we need to know.
Thank you, Ghida. Yes, as ever, I welcome you. Those of you who are watching online, we have a lot of debate to get through. Our speakers are ready, Ghida is ready, and our student audience is ready. But I'm always keen to hear from you, wherever you are in the world. If you're watching this, get in touch. If you feel passionately about what is being said on stage and you have your comments or questions, just use that hashtag, #DearWorld, or make sure you tag us in your posts. Make sure you tag us in your posts at Doha Debates. I nearly forgot that then. And we will be able to find your tweets, and Ghida, I'll be able to present them to you so you can engage with them as well.
And I look forward to that, Nell. But before we begin, let's take a quick look and see what we actually mean by capitalism.
Capitalism is essentially the only economic system around in the world today, and it's at a bit of a crossroads. The main thing that sets a capitalist system apart from previous systems is the reinvestment of money made from selling things back into production.
This is called growth, and it is the main economic goal of capitalism.
On average, people have an easier life than a few centuries ago. From an era of peasant farmers, capitalism brought us here, where a tiny robot vacuums your floor every day. It's improved the lives of tens of millions, hugely reducing poverty, illiteracy, and infant mortality. But it's not working for everyone, and the gap between the rich and the poor is widening. One way to address the problem would be to adopt a kinder capitalism built with stronger safety nets that can help look after the disadvantaged and the vulnerable. Another option is for capitalism to evolve into something else, like socialism. Of course, a viable option is to continue on the path that we're currently on, to prioritize growth over everything else. What capitalism evolves into will affect nearly every human being on the planet. The good news is that we can choose how society is structured. But we need to decide carefully and soon.
So then, do we continue with business as usual, or do we rethink fundamentally what capitalism means, which is obviously something different to different people? So what are then the arguments for and against capitalism? Well, joining us here today, it's a pleasure to have three experts on the topic: Jason Hickel, ameenahguribfakim, and ameenahguribfakim. And as always, we also have with us, joining us in the audience, Dr. Govinda Clayton, our connector.
Dr. Govinda Clayton is a senior researcher in peace processes within the Center for Security Studies at ETH Zurich. Dr. Clayton's research interests include negotiation, mediation, conflict management, and civil war. As our connector, Dr. Clayton will provide guidance on identifying common ground and steering towards bridge building and consensus.
So then, that is everyone. Time now to hear from our first speaker.
Our first speaker, Jason Hickel, is an anthropologist and author whose most recent book is The Divide, a brief guide to global inequality and its solutions. Originally from Swaziland, Jason focuses on global inequality and ecological economics.
Growth is killing us. It is the single greatest driver of climate breakdown and ecological collapse. We urgently need to shift to a post-growth, post-capitalist economy. Right now, we're trapped in an economic system that is structurally dependent on growth at an exponential rate, year after year, with no identifiable endpoints. Capitalism requires ever-increasing levels of extraction and production and consumption just to stay afloat, chewing through our living planet in the process. And virtually all of this crisis is being driven by rich countries. The science is clear. If we want to avoid catastrophic climate breakdown and reverse ecological degradation, rich countries need to lead with radical emissions reductions, getting to zero by 2030, while dramatically scaling down resource use. And to achieve this, we need to abandon our mindless march towards growth. Now, my colleagues here might say we needn't worry. All we need to do is make growth green, switch to renewable energy, and we can keep growing forever. But scientists firmly reject this idea. Yes, we need a Green New Deal with massive public investments in a clean energy transition. But we cannot transition quickly enough to stay within the carbon budget if we keep growing the economy at existing rates. More growth means more energy demands, and more energy demands makes it impossible to decarbonize in the short time we have left. The only way to make it work is by actively reducing our energy use and scaling down industrial production. This will make it easier to accomplish a rapid transition to renewables, halting climate breakdown while allowing our planet's ecosystems to regenerate. So what does this look like? Well, we could legislate for longer product lifespans and rights to repair. If our goods last twice as long, we will use half as many without any loss to our quality of life. We can free our public spaces from advertising, liberating all of us from the pressure to consume stuff we don't need or even really want. We can choose to scale down the production of destructive products like McMansions, SUVs, arms, and beef. Reducing unnecessary production means freeing people from the drudgery of needless labor. And by shortening the working week and rolling out a job guarantee with living wages, we can ensure that everyone has access to meaningful work and dignified lives. Some say we need economic growth to achieve social progress. But that is a lie. The vast majority of income from growth gets captured at the very top, while most people see very little benefits. Once we wake up to this madness, the solution becomes clear. We already live in an abundant economy. We don't need more growth. We can achieve progress right now without any growth at all, simply by sharing what we already have more fairly. Justice is the antidote to growth. So we can maintain our mindless devotion to the dusty dogmas of the status quo, sacrificing our future and our planet on the altar of capital. Or we can throw off the shackles of this irrational system and build a better, more just, more ecological economy for the 21st century. We have a choice before us: growth or life. Thank you.
Our second speaker, Ameenahguribfakim, is a biodiversity scientist who served as the 6th president of Mauritius from 2015 to 2018. Ameenah was the first woman to be head of state in her native country.
Capitalism is the world's preeminent system of economic organization, yet in the court of public opinion, capitalism is on the ropes. You've heard my fellow guests talk about the flip side of capitalism, with its effect on whole economies and people. Let me try and paint a different picture. Growth matters, so does its quality. Without growth, there can be no sustainable development. As the former president of a country, I have seen the positive transformation linked to economic growth. My island nation country has been transformed since independence 51 years ago. It is now an upper middle income country, and we have done this by prioritizing economic pillars with people-centered investments. Economic growth fuels the economy and improves livelihoods. Is it perfect? Hardly. Are there still problems? Unequivocally, yes. We have to confront issues like chronic poverty, diseases, and now struggle against the vagaries and hardship caused by changing climate. We know that economic growth, shared prosperity, and more open economy help us tackle them. So, in direct opposition to protectionism and isolationism that is coming out of the United States, Africa has gone the other way and has created the world's largest free trade area since the establishment of the World Trade Organization in 1995. It came into operation in May 2019. I can safely say that Africa is on the move. When I say on the move, I mean with economic growth, the contested subject of tonight's debate. In recent years, Africa's average annual GDP growth has consistently outpaced the global average and is expected to remain at least 6% until 2023. 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. By 2035, Africa, the youngest continent, will be the source of a global labor force with implied potential for growth and savings, thus impacting poverty reduction. By 2050, the richest 10% of Africans, that is 250 million people, will drive a nearly 5-fold expansion in the demand for consumer goods and services. This is why broad-based, inclusive economic growth is vital. Fortunately, Africa's governments are developing the required infrastructure and institutions, even as political leaders are implementing reforms aimed at improving the business climate. And reforms are happening, with 5 of the 10 most improved countries in Africa, and most of all recorded reforms occurred in sub-Saharan Africa. And I would argue further that growth also ensures innovative reforms. There is no doubt that we prosper with growth. Inclusive growth has and will remain key to leaving no one behind and build a prosperous future for the benefit of all. Thank you.
Our third speaker, Anand Giridharadas, is an editor-at-large at Time magazine, a political analyst at MSNBC, and the author of the best-selling book Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World.
If you ask me what I think about capitalism, I would say maybe it's something we should try. Because free market capitalism we're talking about tonight is not what we actually have in its supposed epicenter, America, where I live, and about which I write in Winners Take All, a model America is exporting to the world. What we have come to know as capitalism isn't really capitalism. If capitalism is defined by a rugged confidence in one's chances in the marketplace, in the souk of information or ball bearings or coffee, what I see around me is something defined instead by slouching insecurity. The most lionized capitalists of our time are a group of mostly men, profoundly insecure men, terrified by the prospect of competing in a genuinely free and fair market. The bankers who plunged the world economy into the abyss weren't confident about their chances in the market, which is why they rigged regulations and tax codes to give them undue advantages and immunities. The oil companies that have given our planet a terminal diagnosis aren't confident about their chances in the market. Without rigging policy and using bribery and violence and spreading fraudulent pseudoscience, many of them would be extinct. The monopolists and would-be monopolists of Silicon Valley aren't confident of their chances in the market. Otherwise, they wouldn't donate to politicians and spread a phony image of themselves as saviors to avoid regulation and being broken up. A capitalist self-image of swagger masks a capitalist reality of self-doubt. Self-doubt that then motivates our so-called capitalists to commandeer power to protect their mediocrity. What I see all around me is not capitalism in any meaningful sense of the word, but capture. Capture looks like 26 billionaires now owning as much wealth as the bottom half of humanity, 3.8 billion people. Capture looks like the global top 1% monopolizing 82% of new income in a recent year. Capitalism looks like the few hoarding progress itself. And how does this capture persist? By dressing itself nowadays in the costume of enlightenment. Woke capitalism is everywhere around us. Billionaire philanthropy, impact investing, give one, get one products, social enterprises, basically everything Bono is involved with. But woke capitalism is all too often a smokescreen for a manic hypercapitalism that is destroying opportunity and jeopardizing the earth. But capitalism or not capitalism, Milton Friedman or Karl Marx, is not the real debate. There's always going to be business, and there's always going to be government, and the question is the relationship. The debate is what kind of capitalism and what kind of counter-pressures can keep business honest and keep it in its proper place. Thank you.
All right, so we now had the opportunity to hear from all three speakers with me here on stage, very different perspectives. Perhaps I could quickly summarize the essence of what each position represents. In the case of Jason, very clearly, he says that growth is killing us. We need to stop growth. He believes the answer lies in a radical departure from capitalism, which he believes has failed to deliver on the promises. Ameena, on the other hand, believes that growth is actually vital. We must embrace it. Yes, there are problems with capitalism, but it's the best option out there. And Anand, finally, somewhere in the middle, dare I say, growth isn't the problem. We need to redistribute the wealth. So Anand, not suggesting that we do away with capitalism, but not suggesting a tight embrace either. So let's now hear what you think about these three very different positions.
It's time to vote. We need your input to find common ground among the speakers. We want to know exactly how much value you attach to the arguments you've heard. You have a total of 100 points to divide. You can divide them over 1, 2, or all 3 statements. To do so, simply assign points to the statements on a sliding scale.
All right, so as everyone is on to their phone, voting away, Nell, let's go to you quickly and give us a sense of what the reactions out there online look like.
They are very opinionated online, I think you'll find, much like I'm sure these guys have got their heads down voting right now. But thank you for getting in touch. As always, just make sure you hashtag Dear World so I can easily find your comments and suggestions. Just two to read out right now. We've got someone from South Africa watching. It's Rhoda, and Rhoda says, Doha debates a lot. It's never enough, as in growth is never enough. The forever rising cost of living, the lack of education on how to manage it, the social pressures that we subscribe to also contribute to depression and over-indebtedness. We need more financial education, she says. And I'd very quickly like to shout out to the 8th graders who have missed the field trip and stayed behind to watch the Doha debates. Right now they're watching. Thank you guys for tuning in. 8th graders. Wow, I just want to know what you guys think about this debate. Make sure that you guys comment as much as you can. And just very quickly, there seems to be a consensus forming online about the fact that capitalism is in a moment of change, that things are changing. One thing they're not sure about is exactly which one of our solutions is the best way forward. Rida.
Definitely a lot of fluctuation, a lot of movement around this issue. And we're seeing it on the streets with the protests that we're witnessing in so many different places in this region, certainly as well. Nell, I'm told that the votes are now in. So let's go to them and see what we've got. I think we've got them on the screen. Here we go. So, well, I can see that there's a clear favorite, and that was the 3rd position. That was Anand's position. Growth isn't the problem.
If it was legal, I would buy you all a drink.
All right. A different kind of drink, maybe. But anyway, growth isn't the problem. Redistribute the wealth. So that's something that's obviously resonated a lot with the audience here and with people voting online as well, with 54% of the vote, Anand. Whereas the other 2 perspectives gathered way fewer votes. And we'll see whether that can actually shift when we begin to delve deeper into your arguments. Let's see how much you can actually sway the audience one way or the other. And that is what happens when we get into our next phase of the debate.
Welcome to the Mejlis, a traditional Arab consensus building practice. The focus of the Mejlis is to welcome critical conversations and reach solutions. Hida will encourage our speakers to bridge differences and find common ground.
So let's see if we can find common ground on such a hot topic as this one. Ameena, you ran a country, an entire country, an island nation, Mauritius, of about 1.2 million people. If you'd known Jason before today, would you have hired him as your economic advisor? Or would you have fired him the next day?
Jason's view, they are relevant to some extent. But when you are running a country, and the way my country has been run since independence, I would go with what Anand has said, because this is exactly what we have practiced. You know, when Mauritius got independent in 1968, the per capita income was $200 and 51 years later, we're just under 10,000. How did we manage to do this has been through a series of very strong decisions that have been taken, but more importantly, we have learned upfront to distribute the wealth. Right? We have given free education, we have given free healthcare, we have invested in the social welfare as well, and started with important decisions like family planning up front. And right now, as I speak, about nearly 30% of our GDP is invested into these major pillars. And so I totally agree with you when you said that there is to redistribute the wealth, but we are now at a crossroad of how to increase growth, precisely so that the youth do not get left behind, in as much as we need now to create new pillars through growth to actually absorb unemployment.
So I gather it's fair to say that you wouldn't have let Jason run the Treasury Department under your administration. But Jason, let's presume, for argument's sake, that you did get the job and that you in fact lasted in the job for a few days. What would you have done differently? How compelling a case could you make against the statistics that Ameena presented in the case of Africa? Capitalism has, on the whole, been good.
I'm very glad you asked, because actually I would probably agree with Ameena on this, because my argument here is not that poor countries should abandon growth, but rather the rich countries should, right? And this is actually a question I would put directly to Anand as well. So yes, we need to reform capitalism in America, but do you think that the US, with its existing extremely high levels of resource and energy use, should continue growing resource and energy use? That becomes a key question we have to address. And so as far as poor countries go, they should absolutely pursue growth to generate the resources necessary to invest heavily in healthcare and education, right? But growth should not be the objective in and of itself in perpetuity.
But how can you do that if you're suggesting that we stop growth? I mean, how can you grow the economy? How could you grow the health sector?
I'm not suggesting that poor countries should stop growing.
And so on.
I think poor countries should continue growing.
Right.
Of course, the objective should not be growth itself, but should be to grow certain sectors of the economy that need to grow for social benefit, right? But for rich countries, this is my question here, right? Rich countries have extraordinarily high, deeply ecologically catastrophic levels of resource consumption, okay? And these are the countries that need to scale down their impact on our planet to create space for other humans to thrive, because that's not happening right now, and it needs to.
Anand, do you think that Jason lives in a utopian world, in a fantasy world? Can we stop economic growth if we even wanted it?
I think when we have an all-or-nothing conversation about capitalism, we are playing into the hands of extreme capitalists. This is a rhetoric that comes from Wall Street. You either leave us alone to practice manic hypercapitalism, in which every 10 or so years we will tank the world economy. Sorry. Either you leave us alone to do that, to run that kind of casino economics, or you get your light rail, and your government programs are going to lead you directly to the gulags. That's what they want you to believe, right? That's how it starts. One day you make a little light rail system, little public investment, you get into the light rail, and you're just in the death camps, right? It's all or nothing. And the reality is, and I'll speak as a reporter who has done this work, I have been to many different places in the world that practice all levels of capitalism, right? That practice variations. You have kind of state-managed authoritarian capitalism in a place like this, or China. You have anarchic, democratic, universal suffrage before affluence capitalism in India. You get a different set of outcomes. You have in Europe, Northern and Southern Europe, very different models. And everybody gets different outcomes. So instead of this, we've gotten to a weird place in the world where we have a greater understanding of gender fluidity today than of capitalism fluidity. There is a whole set of choices we could make about the kind of capitalism we should have. And that's the conversation we should be having. What capitalism is like religion. It's like any other social force. It needs to live nestled among other forces that have a healthy counter-pressure. And right now, it is eating all the other counter-forces.
But you just said it. It's a system of winner takes all. It's a system of losers and winners. It breeds profit-seeking and greed. Aren't we all greedy animals? I mean, can you suggest that we can have it both ways? Can you just apply a few band-aids to it and say, oh, hold on, we'll just make a new, better version of capitalism? It's still called capitalism, isn't it?
This is a fantasy that has arisen again from the people who want to practice extreme capitalism, the idea that human beings are naturally greedy. I have actually met a lot of human beings in my life, and they're not one thing. Okay? They're greedy, yep, totally. They're introverted, they're extroverted, they're cooperative, they help other people. I have 2 children. I see these various human tendencies every day before 9 a.m. So we have the whole point of having societies, of having rules, of having laws, of having institutions, is you encourage people to do a little more of this kind of behavior and a little more of that. Greed, channeled in the right way, can make people start interesting businesses.
But don't you need a radical departure?
World economy.
Don't you need a radical approach? I mean, Jason is offering you a solution. Why not take it?
I have lived in countries where there was too little growth. I don't know where he's going to set the Jason line.
Radical approach.
And any country above that has to go down to the Jason line, and any country below that has to go up. You know, I think it depends on what kind of growth. If we were all eating, you know, vegetables in America instead of beef, that would be a very different future. If we had, you know, all clean cars instead of gasoline cars, that's a very different future. I actually don't accept the proposition that the only kind of growth we can have is a kind of growth that would imperil the planet.
All right, Anand clearly doesn't buy your approach. How do you send it to him?
I mean, I think there's some confused points in Anand's arguments here, right? The first is that it's true there are lots of different types of capitalism, but all of those different types of capitalism have one thing in common, and that is that they require perpetual growth, okay? This is really the issue we have to deal with now. I want to point you to not the Jason line, but rather the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, okay? Now, in their scenarios for how we can achieve radical emissions reductions consistent with a carbon budget for 1.5 or 2 degrees, they point out that rich nations have to dramatically reduce resource throughput, okay, in order to reduce energy use so that we can achieve a rapid transition to renewables. So this includes the USA. So the question is, do you think that the USA, in your reformed version of capitalism, should keep growing resource use or not?
it could grow resource use if it was using renewables, right? It doesn't, it depends on what the shape of the economy is. This is what I'm saying. You know, all growth is not equal.
Well, see, but
right?
the problem is
and I will say, this is very important. I was a reporter in India for the New York Times for many years, and I saw what growth means to people. As Ameena pointed out, I saw what it does, and I know you're not saying developing countries need to stop, but I think we are using the idea that we are growing in a bad way to attack the notion of growing at all. Yeah. I was in the Netherlands last week, and they are growing in a very different way than the United States, with vegan restaurants everywhere and clean cars everywhere. I think it makes no sense to say that both of them are equally on a bad path.
Let me ask someone who was in a position to actually affect change. You just heard it. Is it going to be poverty reduction or carbon reduction? What would you choose? What would be your priority?
You know, Anand has just made the point that about growth and renewables. Increasingly, especially if you look at renewable energy, it has been shown that growth is possible by adopting alternative ways of generating energy. Very often we are stuck with the idea that capitalism means using fossil fuel, using all these exploitative extractive techniques and all the rest of it. But increasingly now, many gurus, economic gurus, are also showing that growth is possible by using renewables. Now, you have made a very good point about growth impacting people's life. And I think I've just given a case example of Mauritius having used growth. Now, how do we ensure that growth is possible? You mentioned the United States growing using infinite growth. Very often within the economic system, at least we've experienced it in Mauritius, when growth is happening in the north, it tends to pull people up from the south. Now, having something very important in terms of human greed. I mean, this is again, I think, which is the bottom line of the problems arising with capitalism. And this is again, when we came to 2008, the crisis of 2008 has also shown that we need increasingly regulators, we need government to be there, because they should be the arbiter of all the issues that we take on board.
But let's face it, that's not going to happen in today's practical world. Can you take on the big tech companies and the governments and the big interests who actually benefit from this system, as you call them, the Davos billionaires, the do-gooder entrepreneurs? Are they going to rein in a system that they have benefited from?
We don't need them to rein it in. We need to rein them in. And here's how we do it.
That's what I was going to say.
The winners of this age of extreme capitalism won because they did two things. Phase one, phase two. Phase one was basically trickle-down economics, right? Phase one was attack government. Government is bad, denigrate it. Full-on cultural war against the idea of government that spread everywhere. People on the right believed it hard. People on the left believed it gently, like secondhand smoke. Then you say, you know, taxes should be cut, regulations should be cut, lionize entrepreneurs, the only good people. That's phase one. Phase one works for a little bit of time. It fools people for a certain, maybe you get a good decade out of phase one, right? Then a few things happen. Social problems start to multiply because you don't have a cop on the beat, and rich people get a lot richer, and people start to get angry. So then you got to do phase two, otherwise you're going to get overthrown. Phase two is the people who are the winners from this situation arrive back on the stage and they say, you know what a shame, what a pity. All these social problems, government can't fix it. Well, here I am with my money. I'll work with Bono, we will work something out. And this is like putting arsonists in charge of the firefighting brigade. So there is a solution,
but you call them
it's called
hypocrites,
democracy, and we don't need their consent.
Sure.
We need to actually build people power to rein in plutocrats.
But you've called these people hypocrites.
Yes.
Yet the system that is in place, that you advocate keeping, actually will make sure that people achieve those same profits that will maybe in the future make them the next plutocrats.
Trickle-down effect.
But I want to get to Jason as well.
Yeah, trickle-down effect doesn't work. I mean, I don't think that it happens naturally. And this is why initially the founding fathers of the capitalist system, the Galbraith and all these people, they had put down the systems. And we have deregulated, we have removed all the barriers, the checks and balances. And trickle-down effect will not happen in economics, and we need to have government regulators in place precisely to rein in on all these big entrepreneurs who are making it. And yet, what we're seeing is increased salary, the discrepancies between the have and the have-nots.
So, Jason, my turn to ask you if Ameena now lives in a fantasy world, and Anand, could you really regulate capitalism? I mean, they both argued that, in fact, all growths are not equal. What's wrong with green growth?
Okay, so yes, here's the thing is that it's actually impossible to disagree. I mean, nobody would disagree with what Anna is saying. I mean, I fully agree with it. I sense that all of you do as well, right? We obviously need to regulate capitalism more effectively, more democratically, and make it fundamentally fairer, okay? What I'm trying to do is push both of them to address another additional point, which is the question of ecological breakdown, right? And now this is a crucial scientific question in the sense of we are presently in an era of extreme ecological overshoots. Okay, we're drawing more from the planet than we're replacing, and the planet is degrading rapidly as a result. And we see this not just in the form of climate change, but also in mass species extinction, ocean acidification, soil depletion, et cetera, et cetera. Now, even if we were somehow magically, and of course we have to have renewable energy, even if we powered the existing economy, growth-based global economy, with renewable energy, it would still be driving those consequences, okay? Because we're still extracting more than the Earth can bear. Okay, so and here's the thing: if we look at alternative, methods of capitalism, like take Scandinavia, probably Anand likes Scandinavia quite a lot, right? They seem quite sustainable, but they consume on a per capita basis about 30+ material tons of stuff per person per year, which is 4 times over the sustainable boundary. If everyone in the world consumed at the same level of material stuff that people in Scandinavia do, we would need 4 planets to make that feasible, okay? So the argument I want to make here is that we can flourish in an economy that requires less resource throughput and less energy. We know that's possible. We have robust economic models showing we can do it. There's a scientific consensus around it. Recently, there was an open letter signed by 350 scientists across Europe calling on the European Union to adopt post-growth principles. So this is not an academic question. It's really one that we have to be posing politically.
All right. I think it's a perfect place now to actually head over to our connector, Govinda Clayton, to see whether there is any way of reaching consensus. I mean, can you see any hope for Ameena and Jason of ever working together? Or are there differences way too fundamental? And where does the conversation leave Anand in all this?
I mean, absolutely not. These guys are never going to get along. That's quite clear. No, I mean, being serious now, in conflict resolution practice, we talk about moving from positions to interests. So moving about what we think we want to the interests that underlie those. And what we saw in the presentations today and at points in the discussion is people really clinging onto their positions, in particular like whether growth in and of itself is good or bad. But actually, if we look at these underlying interests, and I think some of the points Jason just made and Anne previously made, there's lots of commonality between our different speakers. All of the speakers are talking about the need to address economic inequalities, both within and across countries. All of our speakers are talking about the environmental catastrophe that must be addressed in some way. So if we can kind of shift the debate from a discussion about is growth good or bad, and instead explore what are the different solutions that we could possibly have, I think we're going to find more consensus across the speakers.
All right, let's put that to the test. Thank you very much, Govinda. So, Ameena, to you, Jason clearly thinks it's a lie to suggest that we need economic growth to achieve social progress. That's pretty harsh, but doesn't he have a point, though? He said that the growth at the top is captured by the very few. Is it 1%, I believe, a little more depending on which region of the world you look at. Anand also mentioned the fact that the world's top 26 billionaires earn more than the bottom 3.8 billion people in the world. That's capitalism for you, isn't it?
Well, as has been said, this is one form of capitalism. I am of the opinion that we still need growth, and for a country like mine with no resources, only the talent of our people, we have shown that we need growth to advance the economy. But as we are in this 21st century, with a growing population, with an aging population, with 25% of our youth who are unemployed or underemployed, how do you empower them? And how do you engage with them? And how do we actually build a future for them? And this is something that, we have been advocating, for example, the growth in 3 different sectors, the white economy, the blue economy, the green economy. But you'll need growth to fire up these three pillars. We have done very well on the service sector with the white economy, but how do we now engage with the blue economy, the green economy, without upsetting the balance of nature? Because we know that the blue economy, we're still talking about the ocean, and we know the challenges that we face with climate change, and the green economy, the renewables, where growth is still possible. But how do we engage these young people in these sectors of the economy and make this capitalistic system grow and work for all? It's possible, and we are showing the way. Many countries are doing it. You're talking
but is
about...
it really? I mean, you look at the United States,
Yes.
and you live in the United States, we see a wave of young people galvanized around candidates these days in politics who are running on the platform that they want to reverse economic inequality. We've all heard about AOC's Green New Deal. We also know about Bernie Sanders, who is self-described as a democratic socialist.
Yes, yes.
I didn't realize
clearly
Bernie
young
was
people
going to win the Qatar primary.
Well, clearly. He's got
It's
some
an
followers here.
improbable outcome.
No, but clearly, I mean, is it right to suggest that young people are okay with the capitalist system that they have?
But I think, again, this is something that we have to really look at capitalist system and the growth. And what models have shown, in fact, economists, Nobel Prize winners have shown that when you have a distributive system whereby the 80% can still draw from, the system that the economy can share, it is a winner for all. And there are so many other models like this.
I think what we also need to do in this conversation is step back and define growth in a way that is not a banker's idea of growth, okay? Right now, the way the rules are set up, the way the scorecard is set up in the game, the activities you get positive credit for, GDP credit, because that's the scorecard we're using, are like if you cut down a tree and sell it, that's good, you get points. But if you use wind energy, like you get the same number of points, if not less. If you extract oil from the planet, you get points. If you sell people medications for anxiety, you get points. But if you create an economy that makes people less anxious, you don't get points. And there's been really interesting initiatives out of France and elsewhere to rethink GDP so that we would actually have a growth scorecard that reflects the noble aspirations of having people have more calories when they need them and have less anxiety, and people would actually start to have a growth that reflects human flourishing and not resource extraction. I just don't think resource extraction is the only plausible definition of growth.
Are we placing too much on GDP? I mean, Bhutan back in the 70s moved away and rejected the notion of measuring progress through GDP. It moved to something called the GNH. Yes. But is that a practical measure? That's the gross national happiness, where you take into account so many different aspects of people's lives.
Yeah. In fact, there are a number of alternative measures we can use. There's a genuine progress indicator, which starts with GDP and then subtracts social and ecological negatives, right? And so we could do that. And of course, I emphasize that this is an important first step towards moving towards a post-growth economy. But we cannot be agnostic about what I'm saying is the important dimension of growth that we have to look at, which is resource use and energy use, right? Because that's what matters ecologically speaking. So yes, let's shift to an economy that focuses on what we actually want to achieve, definitely. But if resource use continues to grow in that economy in ecologically destructive ways, then that's a problem, and we have to face up to that. So, whatever we measure, I'm fine with that. But as long as we are bringing our resource use and energy use back down to within planetary boundaries, that is what a post-growth, post-capitalist economy looks like.
So let me bring in the audience. If you could please get ready to ask your questions. We've got 2 microphones on either side of the auditorium. But before we get to you, but please do go ahead to the microphones and we can get started in a second. But just a very quick yes or no question to each of you. Do you all agree with Karl Marx's fundamental belief that capitalism inherently had negative side effects, evil side effects, and that it ultimately is going to collapse onto itself? Are we beginning to see the end of capitalism as we know it? Just a very quick yes or no. Anand?
Yes, but I think we can save it from itself and make a humane version of it.
We need a rethink of capitalism because the tools that have been used to make it, these are not the same tools that we use to solve the problems associated with it.
Jason?
I think that capitalism was useful in some respects in the 20th century, but it's not suited for the 21st century, and we need to evolve and innovate towards something better.
All right, we've got a few people ready to ask questions. Let's go over to you.
I want to ask, in a constant development in the world currently, in a world of constant development, I want to ask, is infinite growth or economical growth possible in a finite world? Is it bound to stop at a certain point in time? Thank you.
And who is this question to? Shall we?
I would suggest to the lady in the
To Ameena, a biodiversity scientist. Good question for you. Do you accept that any form of growth on a planet with finite resources is a problem?
Well, first of all, I'm not very happy with the term infinite growth. We need growth. We need growth. The resources are going to be limited. Yes, we are living, as I said, we'll agree that there is only planet A, there's no planet B. But how do we now adapt the tools that we have to generate growth within the limited resources that we have, because the resources are not infinite. How do we adapt, as I said just now, the tools that have generated capitalism? They're not the same tool that will solve the problem associated with capitalism. So we really need to relook at the way we are consuming. We need to relook at the way we are using and reutilizing the resources, recycling the resources. So these are some of the tools that we have to rethink, the concept we have to rethink to generate growth within a system where the resources are limited, it is not finite. And models, energy models, for example, the food consumption model, we have so many other models exist. The thinking is happening, it's on the go. But we really need to ensure that it is accessible and people buy into this idea.
All right, on to another question, please.
Thank you. I have two questions, two specific to two people for you, Anand. It's a question evaluating the role of foreign aid in a country's economic growth. And to you, Madame Excellency, you talked about Africa being what it is now and moving forwards towards a greater growth. But my question to you is very specific, that how can other African countries develop if countries with double taxation agreements like Mauritius act as tax havens for multinational corporations?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for those questions. Let's start with Anand.
First of all, I'm disappointed you didn't also call me Your Excellency, but I'll deal with that. Look, one of the things that I write about in Winners Take All is the way in which billionaires, mostly in the West, mostly in America, use aid to various foreign countries, including in Africa, to whitewash their reputations. It's kind of a drive-through reputational laundromat to do this kind of thing. And the help to those countries is often real. Sometimes it's kind of fake and minimal, but sometimes it's real. I mean, those are real malaria nets being bought. Those are real medicines. But I think part of what that upholds and what those countries then become part of is a laundering of the reputation of plutocracy itself, not just of those individuals, such that an economic system that on a global scale is punishing to those countries, that allows those rich people to hoard most of the resources, ends up hurting those countries a lot more than the genuinely good things that come to them. And so I think it's important to think about the way in which poor countries play this role in trying to do right by their people, but hurting their people by upholding plutocracy.
Thanks, Anand. Ameena, the questions of tax
Thank you. The taxation. I wouldn't say that we are a tax haven. I say we have a very pragmatic tax system. And the double taxation is jointly agreed by governments. When they sign up to a whole series of agreements where we have the double taxation agreement treaty that we have signed with many African countries. Now, our taxation system is a win-win situation for countries which have signed up. And granted, there have been some issues, but I think we are very keen to operate in a system that is transparent, and we have been in the good books of many of the major multilateral organizations as well. So this is something that we find it works for both countries, and we need to dig further and see where the lapses are, and so that we can remedy. But so far, it has been a very pragmatic way of operating.
A politician's response, no doubt. I would ask you, are you satisfied? But I do have to move on. Are you satisfied with the answer?
No.
I just want to say, if it is true that Mauritius is not a tax haven, I just got to go make a quick call to my banker.
Yes. All right.
Change my bank account.
All right, let's go on to the next.
Hi, so my question is to the panel as a whole. While we can discuss or even conclude that today's most common version of capitalism is more harmful to the world than it is beneficial, given the fact that it is a model most of the world has followed for such a long time, and that it is so deeply entrenched in our countries and the minds of most people, is shifting to an entirely different or even a transformed model realistically possible at this point in time? How can we build the people power to rein these big corporations in, as Anand spoke of?
All right, shifting to another model, but what I suggest doing is taking a few questions at a time so that we can hear from the most of you as possible. Let's have another question and then we'll have you answer them all.
So the problem with capitalism is that it's based on the principle that humans are selfish, and this somehow we think is our dominant value, and our system rewards it. So we have created incentives where sociopaths, for example, that are about 2% of the world, are 25% of executives. So the people in power right now do not represent the values of most people and what most of us want. So then how can we create a system that distinguishes between the types of growth, where we value positive contributions to society, and how could we implement that, given that the people in power do not want this system in place because they are benefiting from the current system right now?
All right. Ameena, you must take this question now. And what would you say to the activists in this room, this young girl, and others like her, the Greta Thunbergs of this world, who want something different, who still believe that you are not thinking outside the capitalist box? What do you say to them?
The lady has mentioned something very, very interesting, the notion of self-interest. And I think if you look at Adam Smith's very famous quote, whether we owe our dinners to the brewers, to the bakers, and to the butchers, we don't owe him anything because he's operating out of self-interest. But this is again something that many models exist where the business, the industrialists themselves, they don't adhere to the fact that human beings are just naturally self-centered, right? And there are models where the industrialists themselves say, we trust our people, we believe in them, and we're going to empower them, and we're going to ensure that the system, the environment they work in is good, right? So by trusting them, by giving them the opportunities, you can bring the best out of people. So this model of exploitation, as we have already associated capitalism with, may not be true in these circumstances. How many more? How do we get such models? But having said this, in terms of those who actually exploit the system, this is again where we need government, we need regulation, and we need to actually implement these, and they don't become kind of be hijacked by the system. So we need to ensure that, you know, we get value for money out of these so that they can be redistributed.
All right, let's get two more questions if we can. If there's any question for Jason and Anand, please, let's go ahead.
This isn't even working. Okay. So we've had these talks about how growth, I mean, Jason, you've spoken really greatly about how growth cannot happen if we continue to be consumers. And so, I mean, besides the fact that we need to come together as a people and rein in these big corporations, that needs to come with a better civics education, which most of us do not have. And that can often, and call me a conspiracy theorist, come at the hands of the fact that governments are often sitting in the pockets of these grand corporations. So, I mean, if anyone wants to rally outside, let me know. Point is,
right.
My question is for Jason. Yes. Can there be ethical consumerism under capitalism?
All right, hold that thought for a second. One more question.
Oh, go right ahead. My question is for Anand. You said in the beginning of your speech when you were talking that this is more capture than capitalism that we're experiencing in the world, and that there are different forms of capitalism, but even some of the better forms of capitalism, such as Canada or France, are built upon the backs of selling weapons to countries that are using it to starve people in Yemen. Or that, let's not forget the fact that capitalism was built upon the backs of the transatlantic slave trade. So is there any way of distinguishing capitalism from its history and its present? Because even if we're claiming a welfare state, we're still selling weapons to autocrats in other parts of the world to kill human beings. So is there a good capitalism ever?
So the hypocrisy, as you say,
I think it's
very often, Anand, just in a minute if we can, as we have to go to another vote.
It's such an important question, but I think we can't allow the abuse of a system to define a system, because we allow the abusers to be the powerful in that case. I went to the local souk here yesterday. That's capitalism, right? People selling stuff for a higher price than they bought it, hopefully. And I have no problem with the transaction those people were engaging in. And what I'm suggesting is you are absolutely right. Many of the worst evils in history are inextricable from capitalism, the abuse of capitalism. But I don't think that indicts someone in the market here in Doha trying to sell a carpet for 20% more than they bought it, or 200% more maybe, as the case seemed to be. And so I want to separate the abuse from the possibility of saying, yes, it is fine that most people need to make a living and sell things at a higher price than they buy them, but that should not rule us. That should not be an ideology that dupes us. That should not justify exploitation. That should not justify poverty.
I must interrupt you. Forgive me, just in the brief minute that we have before we go to the vote, Jason.
Well, is it okay if I jump in on the carpet seller idea here? Because, in fact, I'm not sure that's the best example of what capitalism is, in fact, right? So what that is it's a way of exchanging goods and services that humans have been doing forever. But capitalism is a recent phenomenon, only a couple of hundred years old, right, that is organized around perpetual, indefinite growth. So the purpose for the carpet seller is to sell enough to have enough money to feed his children and put them through school, et cetera, right? Not in order to expand into a global empire and force us all to buy carpets by advertising aggressively on Facebook to buy carpets we don't need and don't even really want.
Jason, thank you. Ameena, I'll come to you in a minute, but give me a second. Yeah, just give me a second if you would.
I think some of the stores did have Facebook stickers on the outside.
It's hard to stop this conversation, but give me just a second.
Just 1 second about the ethical consumerism, right? Okay. And ethical consumerism, again, it can be regulated through certification. This is where consumers have a key role to play, because they can make or they can break.
All right. So, okay. Well, we heard the arguments, and I'm sorry to have to cut them short, but let's see if anyone in the audience and those people online watching us have actually bought into them. Let's do a quick second vote before we close this debate. And while you all vote, Del, tell us what else you're hearing out there.
I mean, it's getting quite hot in here. There's a lot of opinions being shared, but I've got to say, Rida, people are watching from all over the world. We've got here people from Canada, from California, from Lebanon, in Qatar as well. And lots of people are gathering around that point that Dr. Clayton made, which is we need to make sure that we all are saying the same things when we're saying certain terms. So when we're talking about capitalism, what do we mean? When we're saying growth, what do we mean? Because people are confused about whether you agree, Jason and Anand, or disagree. There seems to be some sort of conflation going on. I'll tell you roughly just some of the tweets that caught my eye, and thank you guys again for using that hashtag #DearWorld at Doha Debates. One of my favorites so far is one from Lebanon. It's Paladin, who describes himself as a bit of a debater online, and he said, we need heavily regulated capitalism if it is going to work at all. The system is rigged to the ultra-wealthy. So I think there's a point for Jason there. I'm just going to give you one more that I really love. We've got some people watching in our shared studios portals in Sweden. Hello, guys. Thank you for tuning in. And a really good point made here by Ron van der Sturen. And he says, capitalism is not suited for the 21st century and needs to evolve. So that word evolve keeps coming up. The idea of corruption keeps coming up. All of these things seem to be very important. And we've got some people who are commenting on Instagram as well. One more. Here we go. We've got time for one more on Instagram.
All right. No, a very quick one, actually. We do have the results now.
Oh, brilliant. I'll be very quick. The two words that seem to be most important on Instagram are power and accountability, which is something that I hope our speakers can talk to in their closing arguments. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thanks so much, Nell. Let's quickly have a look and see if anything has changed since we first began this discussion. So that was the earlier vote, as you remember, Anand, with more than 50% of the vote, 24 and 20 for Joseph. So So I have to say, Jason, your position has really taken off. Growth is killing us, top growth. That is something that has really resonated, as you can tell, 44%. And yours has gone down.
The guy who is against growth is the only guy who grew. I mean, that's the irony.
But Ameena, you still have a lot of work to do to convince everyone here. So very quickly, in a minute or less each, 30 seconds would even be better. What would you say are the sacrifices that we all have to make, big and small, to make this alternative system work?
Yeah, I don't think this is about us making personal sacrifices necessarily. Okay, I mean, of course, we need to consume less in our personal lives, but that's not going to solve the problem. What we need to do is organize to create a fundamentally different kind of economy, one that is fundamentally fairer, more just, and more ecological. And that's not going to happen if we sit alone in our flats and try to consume better. Okay, we need to build political movements, bring new ideas into the mainstream, and build a fundamentally better economy.
All right, Ameena, young people they crave this other system, more fair, more equitable, more inclusive. Are you still going to tell them that the answer lies in capitalism?
The answer lies in capitalism. We need to have growth so as to generate the resources, but the bottom line is that we need to have a shared practice of sharing the fruit of the growing economy.
Anand, your priority?
Don't click, join.
All right.
Yeah.
It is the construction of people power that is too overwhelming for plutocrats and corrupt leaders that will truly change the future. And we think we're civically active when we're online. We're not. Join something.
Yes.
Okay, well, a very, very good note on which to end this debate. Thank you to all of our fantastic guests, Jason, Ameena, and Anand. And of course, thank you all for joining us with your questions, thoughts, and ideas. Thank you for being here. Thanks to the Qatar Foundation. Let's continue this conversation online, obviously on Twitter. You can also follow us on Instagram and YouTube and learn more about our other topics this season by going to dohadebates.com. And you can also watch all the videos that we have out there. Let's all make a commitment now using the hashtag #DearWorld at Doha Debates until our next debate, which will take place in Paris during the Peace Forum there. We say thank you very much for joining us and see you soon.
Gonna get in here. Okay. And that's something, conflict resolutor. Are you ready? You know the drill. Don't go anywhere. Stay right there. My online audience, my friends, my pals, my fans of the Doha Debates, what did you just think of what you saw? That was amazing. Everything in that room was amazing to watch. I particularly love the fact that our audience, our studio audience, got absolutely involved in that debate. Now, in the next 10 minutes or so, I've got a lot coming your way. So stay tuned and remember that hashtag is #DearWorld. Remember that we are at Doha Debates. Tag us in your posts and I will continue to read all your comments. I want to welcome some of our friends who are watching in Cyprus, in Lebanon, in Cape Town, in Stockholm, in California, and anyone else who I haven't mentioned. You are all welcome. I want to know what you think, so make sure that you get involved. In a moment, we're going to be talking to this amazing man, Dr. Govinda Clayton, who is our connector, whose job it is to, well, your job really is to kind of get as much consensus in that panel as possible, but it's very hard to do so, and I'm gonna ask you about that as well. But in just a hot second, we are gonna have Dr. Jason Hickel, who was on the stage, one of our speakers out here. Eventually, he got the most votes. He got the biggest share of the votes. So I want to know what he feels like hot off the stage. And as you can see, all of our studio audience are pouring out. They're here. They need some water. They need to hydrate. It's very important. But before all that, Dr. Clayton, Jason's here.
Hey.
Come on in.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
All right, thank you.
Are you okay?
Barely.
Bruising.
Barely survived.
I'm going to let you take a breather. I'm going to let you hold on and take a breather. I'm going to go straight to Dr. Clayton Govinda.
Yes.
We're pals in real life. We do hang out.
It's
We're
true.
friends. Tell me, was that discourse, whatever happened in there, was that useful to the debate about growth and capitalism?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the big problems that we have in the world right now is we're not having these difficult conversations. Too much this thing is hidden from view, and so we're not having real experts giving real opinions. And so for me personally, I really learned a lot from that discussion. It was really great to hear Jason's positions, which I'm not always familiar with, and so for me it was fantastically useful.
Now, you are more at home in conflict zones
in hotspots around the world and hostile environments, because that's your work. Dr. Clayton spends a lot of his time in conflict resolution situations trying to get people who are at war with one another to talk to one another. How do you do that? Because we couldn't even agree on terms on that stage. It was very, very difficult.
Sure, well, there's a number of different steps and techniques that we can take, and so that's what I really try and bring to the debate. And so that's what I was trying to bring in a little bit today, which is that, you know, Jason is never going to change his position. There's nothing that could have been said in that room today that was like, all of a sudden he's going to go, actually, you know what? Actually, growth's really great. And Anand's not all of a sudden going to say, you know, like winners don't take it all of a sudden, right? And so what we're trying to do is like shift the discussion from these positions to get into the nuances, more on these kind of interests. And I think Jason did a really good job of pulling some of those points out.
Now, here's another question for you specifically.
Sorry.
When you're out in some of these places and trying to get people to talk to one another, what does capitalism do in these conflict zones when you've got tension, when you've got war, when you've got famine, when you've got all these kind of extreme human conditions? What does it do? How does capitalism affect conflict?
Sure, well, I don't think so much about capitalism. I think very much about economics and economic development, you know. One of the most convincing bits of research that's been done over the last few years clearly illustrates that when we have inequalities, in particular when those inequalities are formed around different groups, that's one of the key drivers of civil conflict. So coming up with solutions to the type of problems that we're talking about today, thinking about ways in which we can creatively address the economic inequalities that we have, both within states, but also across states, is one of the key challenges we face as kind of conflict resolution.
I actually love that. Oh, they're milling, they're chilling. Our students are here. Hello, hello. Welcome to you all. My floor manager is going to find a place for you. Jason, before I come to you for just a quick understanding, I want to understand from you guys. So, Hazar, nice outfit change. For you, whose solution was the most compelling? Who did you buy from?
Of course, I don't know if you heard my speech before the debate, but,
Jason, before I come to you for
Jason's, you know, points were the best, and you know, you reminded me.
But tell me, did you say you're communist?
Yes, I did.
All right. I know. There's always one in the audience. There's always one. Ibrahim, you're 17. Yeah. Who did you believe? Whose argument did you find most compelling? Come and stand right here. Come and stand by me, fella, right here. Whose argument did you find most compelling? Face the camera. The beautiful people online watching want to see your face.
Well, I feel like they're all moderates, so to an extent I agreed with all of them. I do think they
You think, Jason, you just got...
Whoa! I'm serious, I'm serious.
Don't call me a mug.
I expected more extreme people.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was kind of underwhelming. There were a lot of ideas at once, a lot of double binds, but I liked it. Ground discussion and real arguments.
Yeah, you seem jazzed, as though this debate seemed to catch your attention.
Yeah, I did.
Good. And who do we have here?
Natasha.
Natasha, I'm Nelifa. It's such a pleasure to meet you. Come over. So you stood up and asked the question. It must be quite intimidating to come across some of these people whose job it is to think about this sort of stuff. Why did you feel compelled to stand up and have your voice heard?
So this has interested me ever since I could remember, and I actually want to go get a PhD in this.
Oh, fantastic.
So hopefully I can do more work like you.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I'm glad to hear that.
And do you think that Jason's point was the one that resonated with you the most, or do you think that actually he's living in cuckoo land? I don't know. What do you think?
I'm actually very interested in the post-growth models, and I was hoping to find you to ask you more questions about that.
We've got a Stan here. We've got a Jason Stan. We're going to leave you with that. Thank you so much for coming over and sharing your thoughts. Now to you, Jason. If you had to summarize in 3 words what you went through on that stage, what would you use?
In 3 words.
In 3 words.
I'll just use them. It was invigorating, it was engaging, and conflicted. Clearly conflicted.
Do you feel the weight of the audience who are watching us online at Doha Debates right now? And do you feel the weight of representing your opinion and your beliefs and compelling this gaggle of people to change their minds? I mean, I could tell you were very serious on that stage. It means something to you more than just an academic debate.
Yeah. I really do feel the weight. It's, I mean, the reason that I do this and spend so much energy on it is because I feel very passionately about it, and also because this is what we have to do. I mean, there's a scientific imperative behind transitioning to a different kind of economy. I mean, we're all going to live, as young people, we're all going to live through the catastrophes of climate breakdown, and we must throw our best minds at the problem and come up with something better.
So,
can I ask a question?
Yes, no, Govinda.
Hey, so I totally agree with your point about the fact that the solutions to these problems aren't at the individual level, and that they need to happen at the state level with regulation.
Yeah.
But as an individual, Like, what type of things should we be doing if we were to buy into your kind of mindset?
Yeah, we don't run countries like Ameena does.
Yeah.
So we can only do what we can do.
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the things that young people have been involved with so effectively is the struggle against climate change, the struggle for effective climate legislation. Now, and here's the thing, is what I've been representing on stage there is scientists' views on what we need to do to achieve radical emissions reductions, right? And so the more we can build political momentum as young people around effective climate action, then the more we can create conversations about this transition.
Now, you have absolutely, Jason, divided opinion more so than any of our other speakers. And I know it's shocking because Anand was on stage today. Can I read you a few of the comments that people made directly about you on Twitter? Are you ready? Well, your point did resonate the most with our audience, so that's something to account for. Andrew Jose says, growth is killing us, says Mr. Hickel. He probably wouldn't be saying it if he looked at the poor African nations with corrupt social systems. Growth improved lives. As someone from the third world, I can say that capitalism made my nation better. That's the charge laid at your door.
Well, so it's really important to emphasize that I'm not talking about poor nations degrowing, all right? I'm talking specifically about rich nations. They're the ones that are driving ecological breakdown and climate collapse.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's important that poor nations focus on, the kind of growth they need to improve social outcomes.
So Andrew
But
Jose,
it should never be, an objective in and of itself.
there you go, Andrew Jose. You got a direct answer from the man himself. We're going to move on to Texas in America now. We got one of your stands, actually, one of your biggest fans saying, I enjoyed listening to Jason speak, and he seems to be the one who gets it the most and is the most transparent. That's an interesting word to use in that situation. The other two seem much more pro-capitalism. Where do you stand on the capitalism-socialism spectrum?
Well, so here's the thing, right, is that 20th century socialism is not going to solve our problems. Why? Because, the left of the 20th century did focus effectively on redistributing the yields of growth. But on the question of growth, they were united with the capitalists, with the right. And so we're in a new era now, okay? So the old left-right divide is not going to work for us anymore. What we need is a progressive politics that's also organized around a post-growth economy, and that's new.
Tommy, find me some more people that want to talk. I'm going to try and gather some more opinions and thoughts for you. Whilst we do that, I'm going to actually go through some of these comments that seem to be really compelling. There was this one comment, guys, Moni the GJ, if I can say that, from Canada, who says, with a conscious capitalism, and Govinda, I wonder what your take on this is. Moni says, with a conscious capitalism, it provides opportunity for all, it raises and enriches all, liberates our collective creativity. Without conscious capitalism, it destroys, monopolizes, divides, enslaves. Now, the pendulum, Moni says, is swinging towards consciousness and more people awakening. Do we need a revolution if we can have steady growth where people can come to consensus slowly rather than quickly? Hi. Hiya. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
I just asked a really complex question. Did you hear?
I did not, because I was
trying. Was Tommy finding you?
Yes, I was being dragged into the conversation, but I did not know what the question was. I've been tweeting this entire time, so if you ever did see me on my phone, I wasn't not paying attention. I was tweeting.
Okay, you hold on.
Yes, of
One
course.
second. Let me get an answer from Govinda on that point.
Sure. I mean, I think the devil's all in the details here, really. That to call something conscious capitalism, it could be almost anything, really. And so I think with this type of development, like, absolutely we need some kind of evolution. Absolutely we need a more progressive politics, and that applies both in terms of the growth-based questions we're talking about today, but in various other areas as well. So we need to think about exactly what that is, and I think that's where the discussion needs to kind of continue.
I'll tell you what, Doha Debates fans, of all the times that I've stood here and talked to you post-show, I've never been with such an amazingly enlightening crowd and student base and guests. So I'm thankful to you for watching online. Thanks, guys. And your comments are pouring in, and I'm so thrilled. Before I get to one from Cyprus here, Justin from Cyprus, I'm going to come to you, stood next to me. Before you go and riot outside on the streets of Qatar.
I'm an anarchist, guys.
There you go. It takes all sorts. What was your most interesting perspective in terms of, like, what insight did you gain? What solution compelled you? I don't want to hear where you were divided. You know, we want to hear where you thought, you know what, that's changed my mind. I think that's a great point.
It's really interesting to see people's perspectives on capitalism, because it just comes to show that each and every one of us have been affected by capitalism differently. And it shows that those who are in the upper echelon will continue to be in the upper echelon, and they will continue to completely disregard all of those who are below them that are in this constant and vicious cycle of being affected by capitalism. One thing that was really interesting is seeing how many people are actually on the fence about this particular issue, and how it almost seems like there was an unwritten rule. There was an elephant in the room that needed to be addressed, and it was, capitalism is bad, what can we do about it?
Now, I've got some numbers here for you. I'm dead proud of these numbers, and you guys are going to be surprised. 2 million of you viewed our lovely debate on Twitter. Thank you all. That's an amazing number. You guys were in the studio, but 2 million people around the world joined us. I think that's pretty remarkable. We've got the biggest change in our vote came for you, Jason. In a way, you compelled people the most with your argument. You started off in our vote. The guys online watching seem to think that you had something going for you, but you compelled and convinced them. One of the men that did not remain convinced at all. What does it feel like to have the biggest cheer of the night go to you?
I honestly felt very good. It felt really good to look at an African leader and personally call them out, because I've always wanted to do that. And I stand with you is not saying growth is bad, but in the sense that the way growth is done now means that people get exploited. And I found it very hypocritical when Her Excellency Ameena was denying the fact that by having these double taxation agreements, no one from Africa generally benefits except Mauritius.
You lost me at double taxation. But what's your name?
William.
William, where are you from?
Uganda.
So William from Uganda made a really good point, Dr. Clayton, and we don't have much left with you guys, much time left with you guys online, so I'm going to try and wrap things up. We're going to go to Dr. Clayton first, and then Jason's going to get the last word. Dr. Hickel is going to get the last word, and then we're going to wrap up. Does that sound fair to you guys? I mean, we could go on forever, but you don't want that. And I'm tired. I've been standing here quite a long time. Dr. Clayton, what do you think about the kind of perspective that we get from our audience? I mean, the point of the Majlis and the Doha debates is to get as many different voices talking as possible. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's fundamentally important. I mean, there's no point in people like Jason and I having conversations in our academic institutions where nobody else is getting engaged. Real change is only going to happen if everybody becomes part of the conversation. And so to hear other people's perspectives and have them listening and engaging is fantastic.
And now, I've got a very specific question for you, Jason. What part of Anand's debate did you agree with? Where was the consensus?
Yeah, where's the common ground?
Where's the common ground?
This is surprising. A lot of common ground, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's clear that I also agree that we have to have a significant redistribution of existing resources in the economy. And here's the thing, that's actually crucial to an effective post-growth system, right, where we share what we do have more effectively.
So say it. Say, I agree with Anand.
I agree with Anand.
Hey!
Redistribution.
All right. Thank you guys so much. I'm just going to come around here for now. Thank you to our studio audience. Thank you to our panel, our speakers, Dr. Govinda Clayton, as ever. And thanks to you, our online stands, for constantly watching. That's it from Doha Debate number 5. You can join us next time at the Paris Peace Forum, in fact.
I was very
We're going to be in
proud of
Paris on the 12th of November. Make sure you join us then. That's all left for me to say is good night.